Hello, my darlings. Welcome to the video. This is gonna be very interesting. It is about Dracula. It is about the birth chart of Dracula, the real person. Not the character, not the fictional vampire. I'm talking about the real person who was Vlad Țepeș. This is how we say it in Romanian. That's his name, Vlad Țepeș. In English, you know him as Vlad the Impaler because he used to impale people. Now, first things first, I want to clarify that his real personality and his actual life are a lot more terrifying than the novel, than the fictional character, and just any story with vampires. Yeah, nah, doesn't come close to the kind of a ferocity that he had. He was someone to be like reckoned with, you know. He is also seen as a national hero, and I want to clarify a few things about his life before I get into his birth chart, because it will make sense for the chart. So basically, he was born in one of the medieval Romanian countries, because in the Middle East, it wasn't just the nowadays Romania. In the Middle East, all across Europe, there were smaller countries. So each nowadays country basically had smaller medieval countries. This was the case for Romania as well. And he was born in one of the three medieval Romanian countries. And then when the Ottoman Empire came to this land, basically things happened, very bad things, and they conquered the land. His father was the ruler of Wallachia, one of the three Romanian countries, and it's not Transylvania. Everyone is like, oh, Transylvania, yes, vampires, yes, no. That's bullshit. That he did not rule in Transylvania, he ruled in Wallachia. Wallachia is one of the three medieval Romanian countries. It's also where I come from. And basically, when the Ottoman Empire came to Wallachia and they conquered the land, they kind of had a very strict policy in order to make the local rulers obey. So after winning all the wars, and therefore basically kind of making the Romanian state a vassal state. If you don't know what that means, it kind of means like a state that serves you. It's the medieval system. So there were vassal states. A vassal state is a state that serves you one way or another. And for us, it was tribute. So the Romanians had to pay tribute to the Ottomans. This tribute was money, but not just money. So basically the rulers of the land had to give their children to the Ottoman Empire. And those children had to be raised in the Ottoman Empire. And they were basically royal hostages. And this was a policy that was practiced by the Ottoman Empire to make sure that the rulers of the vassal state, you know, don't go rogue. So that's what happened to him. Vlad Țepeș and his brother were taken captives when they were very young to the Ottoman Empire, and they were raised there. He was not raised in his own country. His father was left in the country, but like I said, the country was a vassal state to the Ottoman Empire. Now, some years later, noble families in Romania, well, noble families, they plotted an assassination of his father. So they basically overthrew his father. And, well, basically this is the Middle East, so there's a lot of political instability. And he heard about this. He was still in the Ottoman Empire when this happened. So you can imagine how it must have been like for him. He was not in his home country. His father was assassinated. He just heard about it from a very distant land. And some other political stuff happened in Wallachia. Meanwhile, the Ottoman Empire had plans of putting someone on the throne that they knew was going to be loyal to them, and they thought that Vlad, because he had been raised in the Ottoman Empire, would be loyal to them. So they helped him, they gave him army to come back to Wallachia and take back the throne for himself. He did that, and prior to taking back the throne, his pact with the Ottomans was that he would pay tribute to them after taking back his throne. He didn't. So basically he came back to his home country, he took back his throne, and then he started basically being him. The real Țepeș, the real Vlad the Impaler. This is where the gruesomeness starts. Although I want to defend him, I don't think this is where the gruesomeness starts. I highly believe that he was abused in the Ottoman Empire, one way or another, or even multiple ways. I do believe he was abused by the Turkish because he just had such an intense hate for them later on. So, you know, he was definitely abused when he was a child and raised in the Ottoman Empire as a hostage, a royal hostage, but still a hostage. So, after he took back his throne, he played a good boy for a short time. And then he invited the noble families of the country to celebration. Let's call it a celebration. And a lot of them came. And, well, not just a lot, but like a lot. Like a lot of them came to that. You can imagine it like a I wouldn't call it a ball, but just a celebration of some sorts. And he slaughtered them all. This is where his cruelty starts taking action. And he's basically at this point taking revenge for the assassination of his father, because these are the families that plotted the assassination of his father. So it's kind of like we can debate that he had this. He wished he was there to defend his father. He wished he was with his father. And when he came back to the country, he definitely took revenge. And that's when the impalings started. He started impaling people. So basically the first people he impaled are people of the land, like Romanians themselves. And if you don't know what impaling is, this is why I say that his real character is a lot more terrifying than the vampire stories. Because impaling is a medieval torture method. It's one of the most... because what it meant is basically taking a long piece of wood that has a pointy end, and the people that were experts at impaling, they would basically, brace yourselves, they would basically push that with the pointy end through people's asses, and they would push it, and they were capable of avoiding all the vital organs. So they were basically pushing that all through your body until the pointy end would get out of your body through this side or your neck. The point was, well, not really your neck, because had it gone out through your neck, you were dead. The point was to keep the person alive. So basically the pointy end of that big piece of wood would go out of your body through this side. So kind of like the shoulder, this or this side. And then they would erect that big piece of wood, and you are basically on it. So this is the piece of wood and this is your body. Yeah, that's what impaling is. And those people were left on that piece of wood, and basically gravity would just do the rest of the thing. So because the piece of wood was erected, gravity would just pull your body down. So you would literally be going through that piece of wood. And you were alive. The Middle East. So, those were the first people he impaled. And he stopped paying tribute to the Ottoman Empire. And this went on and on. For a while, the Ottoman Empire didn't say anything about this, because maybe they thought he was going to pay the tribute at one point. But just months went by and he was not paying any tribute anymore. Then the Ottoman Empire sent some emissaries At one point, the emissaries that the Ottoman Empire sent got to his court. They basically sent the message to him that, well, you have to pay the tribute. And he played a little game on them. He told them that they should take off their hats. And they said, my lord, we cannot do this, because the custom of the Ottoman Empire was that they could only take off their hats in the presence of the Sultan, who was basically the king of the Ottoman Empire. And he knew the customs of the Ottoman Empire because that's where he grew. And based on this, he wanted to play with them. And he told those people, take off your hats. And they said, we can't because you're not the Sultan. And he said, well, I am the king in my country. And that was basically his message. I am the king in my country. I'm not paying anything to the Sultan anymore. This is not a vassal state to the Ottoman Empire anymore. So basically that's the moment he started standing up for himself and for Wallachia, because he was now the ruler of Wallachia. And that's why he is a national hero for us. And he basically, because they didn't want to take off their hats, again, brace yourselves, he ordered his men to take some nails and they pushed the nails through those people's skulls. Because he said, well, if you don't want to take off your hats, I'm gonna have them stuck to your heads forever. And he ordered his people to do that. So basically they took nails and then in those people's heads with their hats on. And that's when the whole conflict between him and the Ottoman Empire started. Fast forward a little bit later, it's war between Wallachia and the Ottoman Empire. And this is where his genius comes to play, because no matter what you think about him, no matter what people say about him, about his cruelty, he was a military genius. This is one of the defining traits of his character, of his personality, and this is also one of the keys of interpreting his chart. He was a military genius. If you study history and if you study all his strategies of battle, you will see that he was... I'm not sure I have all the time in this video to go through all the details of his battles, but I'll give you one example. This is my favorite. I'm a Gemini. It's my favorite example because it involves the use of languages. So basically he was brought up in the Ottoman Empire, so he knew Turkish. He was able to speak Turkish very well. So it's at one night during the war between Wallachia and the Ottoman Empire, he took a few men, just a few men. And this is also another defining trait of his personality, his insane courage. He took just a few men and they broke into the Ottoman quarters where the Ottoman army was resting. It was at night. They were dressed in Ottoman uniforms, and he yelled in Turkish. He yelled, watch out, the Romanians are coming. And because he said that in Turkish, everyone got panicked. It was at night. Nobody was prepared for this. So it was at night, and he just created chaos in the Ottoman settlement. And basically what he did was make the Ottomans kill one another. All he had to do was just break into their camp and say these words in Turkish and then just flee with his men. That was it. They basically slaughtered one another. This is one example of his military genius. And also one thing I want to clarify for everybody before we go into analyzing his birth chart. This is Wallachia, okay? It's a small medieval country. It's not a big country. It's not even the full size of nowadays Romania. It's 1/3 of nowadays Romania. It's small compared to a whole empire. The Ottoman Empire, I want to remind you, if you already know this, if you don't know this, I'm going to tell you something about the Ottoman Empire. It was a political force at that time that the whole rest of Europe was afraid of. I want to put this into context for everyone to understand. This was an empire that the whole rest of Europe, Central Europe and Western Europe, all of those countries were afraid of the Ottoman Empire. He just spat in the face of that empire with a small country. This is why we look at him with so much respect, and this is why he is one of our national heroes. He basically managed to push off the invasion, the advancement of the Ottoman army for a long time, considering the difference of forces. A whole empire that was coming at him full force because he had angered the Sultan. The Sultan was quite angry with Vlad. So he was coming full force. So the whole rage of the Ottoman Empire against this small medieval country. You know, the scales are not quite balanced in terms of military force. What he could not have in terms of military force, he had in terms of literally military genius. And his tactics were basically psychological war onto the adversary. He knew that he could not fight them with just force, like physical fight. He would have lost so fast if that was his only resource. But it wasn't. He knew how to use every single little resource that he had available. And this is one of the defining traits and one of the key traits to figure out what rising he is. And why do I say that? Why do I say figure out what rising he is? Because nobody knows when he was born. There's no record. There are no records of his birth. Nobody knows when he was born. People just know where he was born, but that's it. So historians have kind of like a range of 5 years, 4 to 5 years, during which they say he might have been born. Those years are 1431 to 1435. So you can imagine, for an astrologer, you know, you have to do some digging to figure out when he might have been born. Because it's to look for somebody's chart in this range of 5 years. So we have to take 4 years from 1431 to 1435. Everything has to be analyzed, and that's why I wanted to talk a bit about his life and his personality and the defining traits before going into the analysis of his birth chart. Luckily, I'm a Romanian myself. I know the history, so it was easier for me to find the chart. Okay, so first of all, I want to start with a description of him, and it's the only description we have of him. The only description, like in terms of how he looked. And it's not even from local sources, it's from an Italian. An ambassador, basically. And this person said that Vlad Țepeș was, quote, stocky, strong, with a cold and cerebral appearance. He had a strong aquiline nose. If you don't know what aquiline means, it basically means looking like a vulture, like an eagle. So he had a strong aquiline nose, a thin face, with very large green eyes. He also had a strong neck, black curly hair, and wide shoulders. Unquote. Okay, so this is the only description we have of him. Now, based on everything I said about him, and the more you go into studying his life and everything he did and everything he's been through, you will get convinced that he was a Scorpio rising. I am fully convinced he was a Scorpio rising. I looked, like, when I was doing the research for his birth chart, I saw some articles written by 2 Romanian astrologers who kind of hunted his possible day of birth, and based on that figure out his chart. But I don't really agree with them. He was basically Scorpio rising. One of these astrologers made him an Aries rising. I don't agree with that. Like, yes, he had the courage. Yes, basically the courage that Aries has, but his courage was just insane courage. Like, insane courage. And this is not an Aries. This is a Scorpio we're talking about. One other thing I want to say about him, that, well, if I say this and you're not convinced he's a Scorpio, then nothing else will convince you. So basically, after he lost the war against the Ottoman Empire, because, well, he lost the war eventually. The reason he lost the war, he wasn't hoping to defeat the Ottoman army alone. He was fully aware of the fact that he could never do that. But he was hoping to receive help from some allies. And his immediate ally was a neighboring country, which, history knows it as the Austro-Hungarian Empire. They didn't give him any help. Basically, I think the title of... I don't know that much about their history. They are our neighbors, but I studied a little bit about that, but not much of it stuck with me because it's far too complicated. Hungarian history is just too complicated. Too many things happening. But at the time, I believe the title of the ruler of the Hungarians was emperor as well. I don't remember exactly, I think. If I'm wrong and you know better, correct me. But he treated with the emperor and he promised him help. So Țepeș was counting on Hungarian help. I'm not sure if I should say Hungarian or Austrian help. I don't know that much about their history. Basically, at one point, I know for sure at one point in history they were fully merged as an empire, Austro-Hungarian Empire, but I don't know if at this point in history it'd be correct to call them the Austro-Hungarian Empire. I'm sorry. I should have done my full homework for this, yes, I know, but I was far too focused on Țepeș. So basically, the neighbors, the neighboring emperor promised Țepeș help, and he was counting on this. Țepeș was counting on this help, and that's why he had the guts to stand against the Ottoman Empire, because he thought he was going to receive more military force from his neighbors. But they didn't give any. And this is why in Romanian history we say that we always stood alone. So, like I said, the whole west of Europe was afraid of the threat of the Ottoman Empire, because the Ottoman Empire had the goal of conquering everything. Yeah, like everything. Basically, it's a whole delusional goal that the Muslims had for a while, that they were meant to make everyone Muslim and conquer all the other lands that were not Muslim and all of that. And Europe was afraid of that because the Muslims were attacking Europe. And the Ottoman Empire was pushing more and more into Europe. So the West kind of had a lot of talk about the Western countries, the Western and Central European countries had a lot of talk about this, and they created alliances for this. And Țepeș was part of those alliances, especially since he was right in the face of the Ottoman Empire. But because this is Eastern Europe, the West and Central European countries just said, we don't really care about them. So they didn't provide any support. So he stood alone. So he lost the war, and then he decided to flee the country, because if the Ottomans caught him, it wouldn't have been well for him. He went into the neighboring country where he got arrested. Like what? So I've been here at the edge of Europe, defending Europe. You promised me help. You didn't give me any. And now I'm seeking refuge into your country, and you arrest me. What the fuck? You know? And when the Ottoman army got to the capital of his country, he was nowhere to be found, but what they found terrified them to the bones, to the core of their bones. What they found was basically in the backyard of his capital city, a full forest of impaled corpses. Not a forest of trees, okay? A forest of impaled corpses. Thousands. So basically, all of the people he impaled, he just left them there. He didn't take them down. He had them in the backyard of his city, presumably for him to watch them every day, every morning when he gets up. This is why he's more terrifying than the vampire. So it wasn't just the Romanians he impaled, the Romanians that betrayed his father. It was also every hostage he caught during the war with the Ottomans. He impaled them. And it wasn't just the Ottomans. Basically, the Bulgarians as well were fighting against him, because Bulgaria was also under the Ottoman Empire. And they were fighting alongside the Ottomans. So basically, whenever he caught, whenever the adversaries were losing battles and he would take hostages, he would impale them. And it was all for display for him in the backyard of his palace. When the Sultan saw this, he fell on his knees on the ground. It terrified him to the core of his being. Can you imagine that Vlad the Impaler actually wanted this? He looked upon this forest of impaled corpses every day from his capital city. He wanted it. So, if this doesn't convince you, he's a Scorpio rising, I don't know what would convince you. Okay. So he's a Scorpio rising. Now, to look far back into history, in such a case when we don't know the exact date of someone's birth, okay, we decided he's a Scorpio rising based on the, like, basically, how do you decide what rising someone is? What is the first thing that comes to mind when you think of that person? You know, and based on that, you figure out the ascendant. Some people say, some other astrologers that looked for his chart say that he was a Scorpio sun because of his cruelty. But they miss the point. They miss the point of the ascendant. The ascendant is the first thing that comes to mind, not the sun. The placement of the sun is what comes next. But the first thing that comes to mind when you think of someone, that's how you figure out their ascendant. So he was a Scorpio rising. Now, the description that we have of him also shows this. So basically, it says stocky, strong. Now, stocky is not really a trait of a Scorpio. It would be more a trait of some earth signs like Capricorn. But then it says with a cold and cerebral appearance. Scorpio. Capricorn can also have a cold appearance as well, but it's not quite cerebral. It doesn't make you intimidated. It doesn't make you, just instinctively fear that person. When someone just gives off a cold and cerebral appearance and kind of like intimidates people a lot just by their presence, that's a Scorpio. He had a strong aquiline nose. So aquiline means like a big nose that's very thin, like a very long nose but very thin, and a thin face. So the ascendant on a larger scale is the body and the personality. But when we look at portions of the body, the ascendant is the head and the eyes. And then the lower part of the face, that's the second house. The nose is included in the second house. So he had an aquiline nose, which means a nose that looks like an eagle nose. Well, eagle is basically Sagittarius. Eagle is one of the animals of Sagittarius. So this means his second house is Sagittarius, right? It checks out. With very large green eyes. Scorpio ascendant gives very large eyes. He also had a strong neck. Now, this has nothing to do with Scorpio, but this shows that he had a placement in Taurus, because Taurus rules the neck. So what makes things big? Jupiter. Jupiter makes things big. Taurus rules the neck. So he had a big neck. This means Jupiter was in Taurus. It also makes sense based on just the houses, because Sagittarius is the second house. The second house also rules the neck. Sagittarius makes for big things. Then it says he had black curly hair. Black curly hair is one of the defining traits of Gemini. But it's not impossible for other risings to have black curly hair. And wide shoulders. Okay, so this is the description we have of him. Now I want to read to you a description of Scorpio rising from Paladipika. It's an ancient text from India. It's basically the original text is in Sanskrit. I have it translated in English. It says, if Scorpio rises, expect roundness in the thighs, bigness in the eyes and chest. Okay, so what do we have in this description of him? It says very large green eyes and wide shoulders. Expect them to be without mentors or fathers. This is what the description of Scorpio rising in Paladipika also says. Expect them to be without mentors or fathers. Well, he grew up without his father. Expect them to be harsh in their attitude towards authorities. Well, it checks out, doesn't it? And expect them to be ill in childhood. Now, when it comes to this description of the childhood of a Scorpio rising, we don't know if he had any kind of illness in childhood, like physical illness, but he was definitely emotionally ill because he was a hostage in a foreign land, taken away from his family. Another thing I want to tell you about him, which is also something that is a key of finding his birth chart. So when he was taken hostage as a child, it wasn't just him, it was him and his brother, his younger brother. Now, the thing with his brother is that his brother actually liked the Ottoman Empire, and his brother did not rebel against the Ottoman Empire. And after Țepeș lost the war, the Sultan put his brother on the throne of Wallachia because his brother was actually loyal to the Ottomans. So his own brother basically became an enemy to him because during the war his brother was in the Ottoman camp. Yeah. Okay, so based on all of this, we figured out he's a Scorpio rising. The description shows that his second house is indeed Sagittarius because he has a big nose and a big neck. And his 10th house is Leo. The 10th house is the house of fame and also the house of our career. And Leo is royalty. What is he known for? What is he known as? What was his career? Royalty. It makes sense. And then another thing makes total sense. He has Libra in the 12th house. Libra is marriage. His wife killed herself. She threw herself in a river. The 12th house talks about this. A lot of people wouldn't say this when teaching astrology, but when it comes to people dear to us that pass away, kill themselves, or just die, it's shown in the 12th house. Either the 12th house, either Pisces placements. Like if you have parents that died when you were very young, your moon would be in Pisces or something like that. And Libra in the 12th house, it makes sense. His wife killed herself. Okay, so this is the kind of like the backbone of his chart and the research, the hunt for his full chart. So he's a Scorpio rising. Now, the next question is, what sun is he? So the sun is either Aries, and in 1431 the placement of an Aries sun perfectly matches his personality. Now, regardless of the year 1431, just an Aries sun in his chart perfectly matches his personality and his life circumstances, because for a Scorpio rising, Aries is the 6th house. So Aries sun in the 6th house. Okay, Aries sun, the sun is exalted. And it's the ruler of his 10th house, his fame, his career. It's in Aries. It's dominated by war and conflict. And it's also in the 6th house. The 6th house is one of the houses of enemies. I also thought a Leo sun would kind of get close, but not really, because if we are to look at the times from 1431 to 1435, when the sun was in Leo, the rest of the placements throughout the Leo seasons of these years don't make sense for his personality. Also, you know, some of these placements would be Mercury and Venus in Leo. Mercury and Venus in Leo doesn't quite make Vlad the Impaler personality. He did not think like a Leo. He did not become famous for Leo stuff, even though he was a ruler. He was royalty, yes. But he was cruel. He was gruesome. He was fierce. you know, Leo is fierce, but not gruesome, you know? And Mercury and Venus in Leo would give him a bit more of a pleasurable life and marriage, and also a mentality that seeks pleasure and extravagance. He wasn't quite looking for that. And another thing that doesn't make sense for a Sun in Leo placement is the fact that all throughout this time, Neptune was in Leo. So to have the Sun with the Sun with Neptune in the first... I'm sorry, I'm getting confused. I'm talking about Neptune. Every time I talk about Neptune, I'm getting confused. I'm very susceptible to the energies of the planets. So every time I talk about each one of them, I get into its vibe. And Neptune is confusion. So it doesn't make sense for this kind of person to have a Sun in the same house with Neptune. Just doesn't make sense. It makes sense to have Neptune in the 10th house because he experienced a lot of betrayal, a lot of hurt, a lot of wounds in terms of his career, to say so, and public image. And for a certain amount of time, the South Node was also in Leo. So it does make sense for the Sun to be in Leo, because if the Sun is in the same house with Neptune and or the South Node, it makes for a person who's not energetic, who's not out there, a person whose vital life force is drained. He was not someone with a drained life force. Nah. Okay. Another potential placement for his Sun is Scorpio. Another potential placement would be Sagittarius, because even though Sagittarius is a very optimistic, the most optimistic sign, it's also the sign of knowledge and education, and he was a very knowledgeable man and very educated. Another potential placement for the Sun would be Capricorn, because he was a very rigid ruler, a very strict authority figure. And to some extent Pisces as a placement for the Sun, because a lot of things about him are unknown. But this is explained by Neptune in Leo. So the fact that we have Neptune in Leo in the 10th house, this shows that a lot of his public image is hidden, because Neptune hides things. Neptune loses things and makes things dissipate and dematerialize. So throughout time, all the information about his life, not all the information, but most of the information about his life was we don't even know when he was born. So it makes sense for Neptune to be in his 10th house, because his public image which is the 10th house, his public image is surrounded by mystery. Neptune is mystery. And also his fame is very fictional. He's not known for who he really was. I'm not talking about Romanians, like we know him for who he was. But worldwide, people don't know him for who he really was. People know him for a fictional character. The character of Dracula the vampire, the Count Dracula. He wasn't even a count. He was a prince. You know. And he was not drinking blood. That's just false information spread by his enemies and then by others throughout time to make Romanians look bad. I don't mind it. I don't mind the fact that our image is vampires. But I do think it'd be a lot more interesting to look at things the way they are, to look at reality. Because, like I said, his real personality is a lot more terrifying than the character of Count Dracula. So, Neptune in the 10th house makes a lot of sense. And the fact that the 10th house for him is Leo, this is very important because the ruler of the 10th house is the sun. So the sun for him not only signifies, you know, what the sun generally signifies for everybody. The sun for him is the ruler of the 10th house, so it's even more public. The sun for him talks even more about what he gave to the world, his legacy to the world, and his image, his fame. So, at the end of the day, I believe the most reasonable placements to look for when it comes to the sun are Aries, Scorpio, and potentially Capricorn. These are the only placements for the sun that would make for the Vlad the Impaler personality. Okay. I also want to tell you another thing about him that will help you understand why I'm looking for these placements. This is not something that history will tell you. It's not written in the history books. It's just folk tale. It's just what people in my country say about him. And I love it. We have a saying, a story, a myth, a legend, call it however you want. People say that during his time, you could leave a bag of coins on the side of the road and no one would take it. Let that sink in. People were so afraid of the consequences of doing anything wrong, anything outside of the law, that they wouldn't even take a bag of coins left on the side of the road. So I'm gonna repeat that. You could leave a bag of coins on the side of the road and no one would take it. They were so afraid. So not only were people from outside of the country so afraid of him, Romanians themselves were terrified of him. He ruled so effectively because he knew that people function based on fear. He knew this is what makes people listen most of all. This is what most humans listen to. Fear. Consequences. Real, harsh, painful consequences. Something to be not afraid of, terrified of. He knew this. And that's how he ruled. So this harshness wasn't just outside of the country, it was also inside the country. But at the same time, like a true Scorpio, there's Scorpio energy inspires one of two things in other people. Either Sarah, either loyalty, like real loyalty, coming from deep admiration. There were people like that who followed him, like really followed him. And to this day, he's one of our national heroes. For a lot of people, he is the biggest hero of Romanians when it comes to national heroes. So for someone to evoke something so powerful in so many people, like I said, he's definitely a Scorpio rising, and the sun has to be either Scorpio, Aries, or Capricorn. Okay, so now we're looking at actual placements, starting with I have a lot of papers here. Okay. So the first year that we're looking at is 1431. So I took the first day of that year. And to some extent it makes sense. The 1st of January for the year 1431. This means a Capricorn sun. Okay, Capricorn sun. And Saturn was also in Capricorn. This would make sense for his personality and life circumstances. And then Mercury is in Capricorn as well, retrograde. Makes sense, but not really. And then Venus was in Sagittarius. This does not make sense for his chart. No. Then we see the North Node in the 4th house of Aquarius. Now, based on everything I told you about his childhood and family and how divided his family was, to have the North Node in the 4th house makes sense. The North Node brings a lot of chaos. Then it's Chiron in Pisces, but that's not really something to look at. Then we have Uranus in Aries. This is probably the most important placement for him, at least for me. Because, like I said, he was a military genius. Uranus rules genius. Aries is military. So Uranus in Aries makes total sense. And then, amazingly, on the first day of that year, Jupiter was at the 0 degree of Taurus. Just like I said in the beginning, he had a strong neck. Taurus rules the neck. It makes sense that he'd have Jupiter in Taurus. Also, Jupiter in the 7th house makes for powerful enemies. The 7th house is the house of marriage, but also the house of open enemies. And he had one of the most powerful empires at that time as his direct enemy. So it makes a lot of sense to have Jupiter in the 7th house. Then Pluto in the 9th house. This just makes perfect sense. The 9th house rules the higher mind. And this is Pluto. Pluto rules cruelty. You get what I'm going at, right? The 9th house is the house of our life philosophy and our perspective on life, the way we see life, like the big picture of life. For him, it's Pluto. You know, what's his perception of the great picture of life? Fear. You have to rule. Pluto rules power. You know, Pluto is all about power and power struggles and fear. He knew that's how you ruled. Don't get me wrong, please. I'm not promoting rulership through fear, okay? This is how it was like in the Middle East. I believe it's better to be loved than feared by people who understand love and are capable of love. But I also understand him, because this was the Middle East. Not so many people were rooted in love. Okay? I'm gonna defend him. Not so many people understood love. Far more people would listen to fear than love. Even to this day, unfortunately. Okay, so it makes a lot of sense that Pluto is in the 9th house for him, because his whole ideology is very Plutonian. Then we have Neptune in the 10th house. I already talked about that. But then we have Mars in Libra in the 12th house. Now, this doesn't make sense. Mars for him is not in the 12th house. It's not a hidden placement. The 12th house is a hidden house. It's a house of the spirit world and the other realm. No, for him, Mars was not hidden. For him, Mars was in the open. And then I searched for Aries season of the year 1431. And what I saw, like, I looked at other dates as well later on, and I looked at other charts throughout that year, throughout the other years, but this is the one that makes the most sense. The date I looked for was 21st of March 1431 because that was the first day of Aries season. But it could have been any day afterwards. It's just the fact that the sun is in Aries. That's what I was looking for, and based on that I looked at the first day of the Aries season of that year. Lo and behold, where do we have Mars? Where do we have Mars? In the first house. It makes sense? Mars in Scorpio in the first house. His whole personality, his whole demeanor, his whole identity. It checks out. It makes sense. Mars in domicile in Scorpio. If you don't know, Mars rules Aries, but also Scorpio. Nowadays, we look at Pluto as the ruler of Scorpio, but in ancient times, when they couldn't see Pluto in the sky, Mars was ruling Scorpio just as much as Aries. So, Mars is in domicile in Scorpio. In the first house. That's what I'm talking about. His insane courage to go for what he wants. And what does he want? To rule effectively and entirely. It makes a lot of sense for a first house Mars domicile in Scorpio. Also, it makes a lot of sense for his life, how chaotic it was and how traumatic it was. And I had a more or less boyfriend. I wouldn't call him boyfriend because the whole thing lasted for approximately 2 months, so it's not that much. The point that I want to make, he was a Scorpio rising with Mars in the first house. He was capable of intimidating people just by his presence. That's how this kind of placement works out. And remember his description, a cold and cerebral appearance. Okay. Then we have Saturn in Capricorn. So basically throughout that whole year, Saturn is in Capricorn. It makes sense because remember what I said about him, how he ruled. He ruled effectively and through fear, through consequences. Very, very, I don't even know what word to use, very rigid consequences. Basically, he would impale you. So if you didn't listen, if you were not respecting the law, if you were stealing, raping, doing anything bad in the country, impaled. And that's why to this day we have that saying about him that you could leave the bag of coins on the side of the road and no one would take it. Yeah, because he ruled effectively. So to have Saturn in Capricorn makes sense because he was cold, he was rigid, he was not afraid of doing what must be done in order to get what he wanted to get, in order to achieve his goals. So both his Mars and Saturn have to be very strong. So it makes sense that both of them are in domicile. Okay. Then the North Node in the fourth house, I talked about that. His family torn apart. It's also his fourth house is Aquarius. Aquarius divides. Aquarius separates. That's how his family was like. And the fact that his own brother then turned against him and all of that, it makes sense. Then, this is another reason that the next placement is one of is another reason why I say that this is the most correct chart for him. We have the moon with Chiron and Venus in Pisces. I look so nice. I'm watching myself on the camera and like the shade of red and black. And like, this is so nice for this video. Isn't it so gorgeous that I actually talked about how my clothes looked like right after I talked about Venus? Okay, so basically Venus is in Pisces. Remember what I said about his wife? She killed herself. Pisces. Another thing, the moon is in Pisces. There's not that much that people know about his mother. The moon is the mother. Like, people talk about his brother, people talk about his father, but there's not that much information on his mother. His mother is the most mysterious person in this whole family, because we don't really know that much about her. So it makes a lot of sense that the moon is in Pisces as well, because the moon is the mother. Pisces, you don't really like. Pisces is an energy that makes things unclear and unknown. So it makes sense. And then, my friends, we have the sun in Aries. Just like I said, it makes sense that his sun is in Aries, in the 6th house. Because the 6th house is also a house of enemies. and betrayal. It's in Aries. He had enemies in war, he got betrayed in war. Poor boy. But I don't want to say poor boy because he was strong. Like, he was a strong person inside, like his core. He was a very strong person. It makes sense that you would have Scorpio rising with Mars in the first house and then an Aries sun as well. But not just that, because Mercury is there as well. And then Uranus. So, the sun in Aries, I already talked about what that means. But Mercury in Aries, there as well, with Uranus in Aries. This is a mind that has clarity when it comes to conflict, when it comes to wars and any kind of conflict. With Mercury and Uranus and the Sun in Aries, this person knows how to fight. This person knows how to plan wars, battles. If this person had more resources in terms of his army, no one could have messed with him. No one. If he was able to do so much with such a small country, can you imagine? Can you imagine? So this house right here, this is why I say that this is the most correct chart. When the sun was in Aries in 1431. And then we have Jupiter in the 7th house. I already talked about that. Pluto in the 9th house. Neptune and the South Node in Leo in the 10th house. Already covered that. And then Lilith, but that's not so important. So, out of all dates, like I said, this is the most correct one. I'll show you some other charts as well to have a comparison so that you see other reasons why I say that this is the most correct chart. Okay, so then I looked at when the sun was in Scorpio that year. The sun in Scorpio with Mercury in Scorpio. That would make sense, but not as much sense as Mars in Scorpio. So this is for October 1431. Okay. Venus is in Sagittarius. Doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make as much sense for his life as compared to the other possible Venus placement, which was Pisces. Mars in the same house with Saturn. This would make sense. It would. It could. But still, Mars in the first house makes more sense. Mars in the same house with Saturn in Capricorn. it does make for a person who's very cruel, very rigid. But I wouldn't say, I don't think it would make for such a powerful Mars. Exactly because it's with Saturn in the same place. So basically, if we have Saturn and Mars both in Capricorn, they're kind of fighting for power, these two planets in that sign. So it's like more of a prevalent Mars personality, or more of a like Saturnian personality. It's like two sides, each one of them wanting to dominate. Whereas the other chart, Mars is in Scorpio domicile, Saturn is in Capricorn domicile. They're not competing with one another in the same sign. So they're not competing for the same energy within the chart. They are in two different signs, each one of them domicile. So it makes her a very strong Mars, a very strong Saturn. Whereas with this chart, even though Saturn in Capricorn is domicile and Mars in Capricorn is exalted, the fact that they are there both, it kind of pits them against one another, and it doesn't quite make for that much of a good use of the placement. We still have Uranus in Aries, but it's retrograde at this point. Uranus in Aries is it's there for the whole span of 1431, but it doesn't quite strike you as powerfully as the other chart, where we also had Mercury and the Sun. In the other chart, we had the Sun in the same house, and the Sun is how the person shines. So in this chart, yes, we have a military genius, possibly military genius. But in the other chart, we had a person who's a military genius, a very powerful mind when it comes to conflict. And thanks to the fact that the Sun is there, this is how the person shines. Now, another reason why this chart fails is the fact that Jupiter moved. It's in another sign. It's in Gemini right now. Doesn't quite make sense. It doesn't make as much sense as having it in Taurus, especially since that description of him says that he had a strong neck, and we already talked about how his enemies were very, very powerful. Jupiter in the 7th house talks about very powerful enemies. Jupiter rules empires. His enemy was an empire, his direct enemy. The enemy that defined his whole personality and life and then legacy was an empire. So it makes sense that Jupiter would be in the 7th house, opposing his 1st house, his ascendant, his personality. Okay. And then the other placements are pretty much the same. Pluto, Neptune. Then another chart I looked at was for Sagittarius season, the same year. I was curious, but it doesn't quite make that much sense. So the Sun is in Sagittarius, so is Mercury. this makes for a very expensive mind. But his second house is basically, the second house also talks about family. So to have the Sun and Mercury in the second house, this would make for a person who constantly thinks about family, and family means a lot to them. You could argue that his family meant a lot to him since he avenged his father the way he did. But then again, his brother turned against him. And I don't really see it. I don't really see this placement for him. Then Venus would be in the same house with Mars and Capricorn, Mars in Capricorn and Saturn in Capricorn. I don't see Venus in Capricorn for him either. The third house is also a house of siblings. His relationship with his brother was not quite nice. Venus makes things nice. So, for Venus to be in the third house, it's not quite... no. Then I also saw the moon was in Pisces again, and I wrote here that I already take the moon's position in Pisces as a clear sign by now. So no, Sagittarius season doesn't make sense. And then basically the moment Jupiter moved into Gemini would be the moment would be one of the indications to stop looking for another chart. But just to erase any doubt that he might have been born at another date, I looked at other dates. Then would be Capricorn season 1431 to 1432. The Sun in Capricorn with Saturn. It could make sense. It could make sense considering the power struggles and the fact that his brother turned against him, and he had to obey but disobey powerful authority figures. But still the other chart makes more sense. Venus is in the fourth house here, and so is Mars. Mars in the fourth house does make sense for him, but it's Aquarius. You could argue that Mars in Aquarius would also make for a military genius, but Venus is there as well. So no. Okay. So Capricorn season 1431 to 1432. No. Jupiter is in Gemini. So no. Also, I wrote here that the Sun in Pisces is rolled out because Chiron is there as well, and Mercury. So when the sun goes through Pisces, throughout the time when he might have been born, it doesn't make sense, because to have the sun in Pisces with Mercury in Pisces and Chiron, this would result in a wounded healer mentality. This is not his mentality, okay? Now another thing is that at the end of 1431, Saturn moves into Aquarius. It could make sense, considering that Aquarius is his fourth house. And, well, I told you how his family was like. But I do think Saturn in Capricorn makes more sense for how he was like, because he was a very strict authority figure, and he had very strict authority figures that he had to go against. Then I looked at the next Aries season, which was for the year 1432. For this Aries season, we no longer have Scorpio domicile. We have Saturn with the North Node and Venus in Aquarius in the fourth house. The fact that Venus is there shows that this is not the right chart, because again, Venus makes things beautiful. Even when things get difficult, even with other difficult placements, Venus still makes things beautiful. This is not his story. Then we see the Sun with Mercury and Mars and Uranus in the sixth house. This would make sense, wouldn't it? I think it would make sense. This particular stellium right here. So this comes very close to the other Aries season of the previous year. But the other the other Aries season, in my opinion, just had no flaws when compared to his personality and life circumstances. The other chart of the Aries season for 1431 checked all the descriptions, you know, whereas this one kind of makes you have certain question marks. Jupiter as well in Gemini. I don't really think this is as much of a match to his personality as the other Aries season. Then I looked at the Scorpio season for 1432. We have Sun in Scorpio with Mercury in Scorpio. It would make sense. Considering the fact that he was described as stocky, you know, if you have Mercury in the first house, you're not gonna be very tall. And the Sun makes things big. So big but not so tall, could make for a stocky appearance, you know, so it could make sense. But the biggest indication that this is not the right chart is this one. Uranus is no longer in Aries. This is why I put so much emphasis on his trait as a military genius. It's one of his defining traits. So this chart follows Uranus crosses into Taurus. So the planet of genius is no longer in the sign of war. So this is not his chart. The fact that Uranus goes into Taurus is an indication that we should stop at this point, looking further for other possible dates of his birth, because if Uranus changed signs and it's no longer in Aries, then this is clear that we don't need to look further. Also, Jupiter moved into Crab in the 9th house. So still doesn't make any sense. Because to have Jupiter in the 9th house means that your philosophy, your life philosophy is Jupiterian. Jupiter is all about forgiveness. It's all about tolerance, benevolence. It is in the same house with Pluto, so we could argue that it made even more of a Plutonic perception of life. But still, once Jupiter is there, the influence of Pluto is made more, but through Jupiterian influences. There aren't that many Jupiterian influences with him. There could be on a personal level. Because, like I said, he was very well educated. He spoke a lot of languages. It wasn't just Romanian and Turkish. He spoke a lot of languages. He was very well educated. Which is why he could make use of his mind when it came to war. But I still don't think that Jupiter was in Crab for him, because the sign of the Crab is his 9th house. Jupiter in the 9th house makes for a very blessed and lucky person. He was a very strong person, but I wouldn't quite consider him lucky. So, yeah. Even though Uranus going into Taurus is an indication that we should stop at this point looking for any other dates, later on Uranus went retrograde back into Aries. This is for 27th of November 1432. It's for Sagittarius season that year. But still, the fact that Jupiter is in the 9th house is an indication that no, this is not the right chart for this person. Also, Mars is in the 12th house again. So no, Mars for him is not in the 12th house. No. So I wanted to look for further dates, but no. I thought about it and I realized it's not worth it. Because already Jupiter is out of Taurus, Uranus moves signs as well. Even if Uranus goes back into Aries, it's retrograde. He wasn't a retrograde genius. He was a fast-moving genius, a very fast-moving genius when it comes to military strategy. So, Aries season 1431 is the jackpot, is the correct time of his birth, especially the beginning of Aries season 1431, because we have both Venus and the Moon in Pisces. Okay, so this has been a video. I'm happy for this topic, and I'm happy to honor him like this, because even though he was very cruel, he is a very interesting person, and he is one of my ancestors. So I'm kind of proud of that. Even though I shouldn't be proud of that, because I have no... Like, I believe we should only be proud of things we do, so I didn't do anything about that. But I'm happy I talked about him, I'm happy I did his chart, and I'm very curious to see how many people will watch this video and listen to this information. And on another note, this is how we track and research charts of people that were born long ago in history, and we have little to zero information about their time of birth. We just do the research and we track the most accurate description, astrological description of their personality. Okay, I also want to let people know that I did a reading, a tarot reading about him, about Vlad Țepeș, because I wanted to ask if he was really that cruel, if he was really that much of a monster. The reading kind of showed he wasn't really that much of a monster. And I wanted to ask where he's at as a soul at this point. And the card of the Chariot came out. And basically in that tarot deck, the card of the Chariot is, the depiction is a chariot moving through the sky. So the message I got with that card is that he's ascending as a soul, no matter what his karma was for whatever he did in that life or others. He is ascending as a soul and he's moving forward. And I love this. If you listened so far, thank you. I would do a reading with him, about him, to see if he has anything to say more publicly. But let me know if you would want to listen to that, if that would be an interesting topic. Thank you. And once again, if you watched so far into the video and listened to everything, thank you. I appreciate it.